Hello, I'm the Angry Spork, taking issue with the first 3 installments of the X-Men Evolution comic. Last time we saw the start of the growing conflict between Charles Xavier's dream of coexistence and Magneto's preparation for war, in a world where mutants are barely on the evolutionary radar in the dawn of the new millennium. With Storm and Wolverine already running super defense and the school ready to get educating, Charles sets out to enroll his first student. Issue number 2's cover sees young Scott Summers barely able to contain his optic blasts, apparently in complete darkness. A lot of people had this reaction while watching X-Men Dark Phoenix. In Anchorage, Alaska, he's wheeled in from the orphanage, convulsing, having complained about eye pain and blurred vision. His eyes are wrapped up, and a doctor wants to have a look at Scott's peepers, despite his protestations, which results in a beam of energy busting the upper floors of the hospital.
I'm going to go ahead and give you a pass because you have murder eyes.
Despite this angle seen here, the next page shows a much more vertical breach. Weird. Fortunately, no one was hurt, and a couple days later, Professor Xavier has arrived to pay for the damages and meet the young man responsible. He's told Scott's been in the orphanage since he was 8, the only survivor of a plane crash that took his parents and kid brother, but everyone is so afraid of him, the orphanage won't be taking him back. Chuck introduces himself to the young lad, offering him a place at his school, and Scott, politely offering his hand, is just happy that someone not only thinks he has a future, but is willing to risk housing him. Not because of the eye blasts. I randomly throw bricks through windows. Also, I snore pretty loud. Later the same day, Logan has joined Charles in the optometrist's office, showing off the ruby quartz material he brought along that, according to Cerebro's analysis, should keep the energy beams at bay. Since even Scott's peripheral vision is hazardous, he needs a visor that Xavier had hoped the doc would design, but it seems he already has a frame in his drawer. Convenient. However, the eye doctor isn't going anywhere near Summers, feeling that he's a time bomb that needs to be locked away. Chuck insists the orphan needs to experience human kindness, especially given how he's been treated, isolated and unwanted, yet he still maintains a sociable disposition. This is the entire reason Chuck wanted the doctor to present the finished visor to him. To emphasize this, he asks Logan to explain his personal feelings on mutant segregation, which he does by popping his claws within inches of the guy's face.
Thanks. Now all our fears are gone.
Show that kid compassion, or my associate stabs you with his claws. Pretty sure that's the Xavier School motto. Go fightin' face stabbers. The next morning, the visors are ready and work like a charm, though the medical staff seemed prepared for the worst. Scott's later discharged, thanking the nurse at the desk for helping him with admittance paperwork, despite how hairy things got. She's a little off-put until Chuck psychically encourages her to say, "You're welcome." It doesn't seem like mind control because when they leave, she looks around like she thought someone was behind her talking. Also, if you look closely at the framed picture in the lobby behind her, it's actually artwork of Jean Grey that was shown during the credits of the cartoon. Look even closer and you can see her in profile when she's in her costume. Such a fun continuity-breaking Easter egg. Outside, the professor leads him to the X-Jet, Logan, and a suited-up Storm, welcoming him to the team. However, not being informed about flying, Scott flashes back to the plane crash where he lost his family and runs off in a panic. Charles calls out psychically, apologizing for not thinking.
How ironic.
A telepath that telepathically says he wasn't thinking. That may be irony cubed right there. He'll explain just how he spoke to Summers in his mind, but assures he doesn't have to take the plane. They can find another way. We'll just have Logan punch your lights out. I sense he feels that's a natural move for him. However, Scott decides he can't avoid air travel forever, so goes along, his new teacher telling him on the flight how brave he is and how much he wanted him to join the Institute when he first discovered him, and that's enough to put a smile on the young man's face. He's further excited to see his room and the uniform he's to wear that will protect his identity while working with the X-Men. Really, Chuck? Could you then explain why Wolverine is the only one on the team who has a mask that actually covers a considerable portion of his face? Yeah, teenager with red glasses and brown hair, guy in a leotard wearing a visor with red lenses and the same hair. No one will suspect a thing. Once he's unpacked, Logan takes him into town to register at the local high school. Scott's enthusiasm at the prospect of making a difference, what his code name should be in costume, clashes with Wolvie hitting him with a ton of cynicism, that it's a uniform, not a costume. He's ridiculously polite, probably won't last a week, and his hospital stay should have made it clear no one wants anything to do with him.
This is life for you now. Endless suffering.
Though I do like this snarky comeback Scott gives about the good first impression he's made on Logan. I kind of question the uniform remark, given how the other suits worn by the other X-Men all seem pretty individualized, though the X theme I think still qualifies them as uniforms regardless. I think costume could also be acceptable, but I could see in World that seeming too much like they do this for fun or something. But hey, maybe I'm just splitting hairs. Scott feels maybe it's their fault for the animosity at the hospital, which feels like a loaded argument. What happened was due to unforeseen circumstances on Scott's part, and people understandably being unnerved around him. It does not justify treating him like he was subhuman, but when a teenager creates 3 floors of skylights, it's bound to cause a stir. Though Wolvie threatening someone with his claws certainly didn't help, so maybe he's half right? Reaching downtown Bayville, Logan suggests Scott stay away from the bank, since as a do-gooder now, even going near a bank leads it to being robbed. And wouldn't you know it, an armored truck is being robbed, right by a crowd of loitering pedestrians. Doesn't seem all that smart on the criminals' part, but they don't seem to notice, so whatever. Wolvie seems to want to deal with this alone, but Scott is so ecstatic at being part of the team just like that, he disrobes to reveal that he also has worn his suit under his clothes, and the pair of them confront the thieves. One of the 2 gunmen manages to hit Logan, though it seems he barely even winged him.
Missed it by that much.
Maybe they had to lose any trace of actual injury, keep it more in line with the more tame nature of the show. I don't know. Scott tackles the shooter, but his partner decides to take a little girl hostage, who is one of several children nearby who must have been deaf to not have reacted at all to that gunfire just now. Logan cuts up his boomstick, while Scott blasts him for good measure, before making sure the kid is okay. Her mother runs up, lambasting Summers as other citizens gather, and the gunmen are taken away. A cop, bank guard, I can't really tell, orders him to take off his mask, and gets indignant when he's warned that he doesn't want that. While he's called a monster or freak, and the mom wondering why mutants aren't all quarantined, the young man insists he's here to help, and wouldn't hurt anyone. Aside from that guy he shot with the same beam that took out multiple floors of a hospital, but he kinda had it coming, right? Scott apologizes if he scared anyone, but since no one was hurt, again, aside from the criminal, maybe they should just call it a day. So the officer slugs him.
Finally, a good reason to punch a teenager in the face. Let's roll!
He follows that up by asking if the little girl is okay, and the mom says she's fine, though still wonders why the freaks are let out in public. Logan, who apparently snuck off to change back into his civilian clothes, what's solidarity, watches as Scott gets up and simply walks away. This Wolverine couldn't explain it, but there was something about seeing Cyclops get punched he really, really enjoyed.
I know how you feel about it, Wolverine, but...
On the drive back, Summers figures those people were just freaked, as he probably would be in their position, but has to believe things will get better. When Wolvie asks if they never do, he replies that they simply never stop trying. Turns out in this universe, Scott isn't really a mutant. He was bitten by a radioactive Superman comic. Later, in the mansion's study, Logan tells Charles that, despite his own reservations, Scott is the real deal, which the young man overhears as he enters the room, though is warned not to let that go to his head. As appreciative as Summers is for everything, he knows the prof influenced the hospital to be nicer to him, and as effective as it may have been in the short term, it probably won't make the optometrist think any better of mutants. Charles admits that imposing such influence did feel wrong, and he'll call and apologize to the eye doctor and the admissions nurse. It was all to prevent Scott from becoming embittered by so many people shunning him, losing his sense of compassion. Not my style, Prof. Check back when you become 1/5 of the Phoenix Force. Let's see what your style is like then. The comic ends with Mr. and Mrs. Gray witnessing the latest example of their daughter's telekinetic powers, levitating the items in her room, as Jean pleads for them to make it stop. It's their fault, after all. They're constantly telling her to pick up her room. I apologize for nothing. Weird for a teenage girl to call her mom Mommy, if you ask me, but whatever. This issue was pretty good, though shows one of its biggest deviations from the cartoon. By this point, the public has been made more aware of mutants, whereas in the series, this didn't occur until the end of Season 2. It's an odd choice, and perhaps a confusing one that maybe hurts any synergy, but it helped to test Scott's fortitude for the mission ahead, fighting for a world that hates and fears him. It doesn't really get into the development of this optimism of his, like maybe some life lessons being all that he has left of his parents, or his experience in the orphanage teaching him the value of compassion. It does feel a little different from the cartoon because while Scott was generally a nice guy, he definitely had a temper that he had to keep in check, whereas this version takes a punch and doesn't even so much as scowl before walking away. It is at the very least noticeably different. Despite giving him the costume right off the bat, it didn't seem like it was Charles's intent that he would see any field action anytime soon, but rather that he took initiative and put on his suit of his own volition. Though I'm not sure why he didn't try blasting one of the crooks to begin with. Maybe he didn't want to risk killing him, but then he didn't really seem to hesitate to shoot the guy when his gun was cut up.
Why would you think that's unnecessary?
While Xavier does take some questionable steps for his students' benefit, he does later admit his mistakes and intent on making amends, which is a lot more than some people do. You would think that given his age, intellect, and experience, he might not have encouraged people the way he did, but in a world where mutants are still relatively new, it could be seen as an understandable error, but still an error, one that Scott shows wisdom in calling out. I did think the robbery scene was a little trite, and barely seeming like the kid was in that much danger with how quickly and easily that gunman was taken out. And it is still really weird that those kids stood around after a gun was fired. We don't even see if they were too terrified to move or anything, so the whole scene did feel kinda choppy. Next week, we wrap up these events that lead up to the show as we get the enrollment of Jean Grey. Like Scott needed any more reasons to appreciate being at the X-Mansion. I'm the Angry Spork, and man, have I got issues.